Hi, my name's Theo Watson. I'm an artist that has been sort of exploring the intersection of art and technology for just over about 10, 12 years now. I'm co-founder of a project called openFrameworks and worked on some projects with the Graffiti Research Lab. But today I'm going to talk to you about a project that my studio, Design.io, recently worked on. And Design.io is 4 of us. We're a pretty small team. We were based in Cambridge in Massachusetts up until very recently, and now we're up on a river in Petaluma, which is just north of San Francisco. We've done projects like Funky Forest, which is our kind of first project together as a team, and we've worked on much bigger projects like Connected Worlds at the New York Hall of Science. Mimic, which is a robot arm that tries to have an emotional dialogue with people who are interacting with it. And we just recently finished a project called Field at the Franklin Park Conservatory and a project called Remnant that was installed at the TELUS World of Science in Canada. So today I'm going to talk about a project that we finished last year. That was a collaboration between BT Wolf and Bell Labs. And before I do that, I'm just going to quickly see if I can fix the display, because it's very, very dark. There we go. Okay. So we were approached by BT Wolf, who was releasing a new album, and she'd been working with Nokia Bell Labs in New Jersey to kind of come up with a performance for this anechoic chamber that they have that's existed since the 1970s. And in a way, the idea was to pick up on this experiments in art and technology collaboration that Bell Labs was doing in the 60s. And so our kind of task was to try and essentially generate a VR album that would live stream from the anechoic chamber at Bell Labs. And then in addition to that, do like a kind of a live augmented performance so that she could walk into the anechoic chamber and perform for people who were in the other room. And we've done a little bit in the area of sort of kind of music and visualizations. We had worked on a project for John Lennon, or for Yoko Ono about John Lennon, that was sort of visualizing his music. And so we kind of knew that this was going to be a bit of a challenge, especially as instead of it just being a couple of tracks, it was a whole album. So we sat down with BT to kind of listen to her songs and try and kind of generate a kind of storyboard for the experience. This just has to... When we listen to BT's music, I'll be like, oh, I picture it this way. I totally picture like these moths or these like word forms.
There were a lot of times when I'd describe something and Emily had actually written down pretty much exactly the same stuff.
Every step is on that beat. Yeah.
And then so we went about kind of building kind of storyboards and mood boards for each of the tracks. And we really wanted each track to have a really different feel. The other thing that we needed was we really kind of immediately locked onto this idea that we would need to have the lyrics kind of time-coded to the second, because we wanted to do a lot with her lyrics. And so we didn't really know a kind of easy way to do this except for kind of manually time coding her track out. So we built a tool in openFrameworks for doing that.
In this flame beside me, and they'll never...
And we found out that it was much easier to time code lyrics at like a slower speed. So we spent hours and hours, and Anna, our producer, spent a lot of time listening to BT at like 50% speed or 40% speed. It was a pretty crude way, but it didn't end up taking that much time. And then here we made like a very early demo. This is like a terrible 3D record player. I'm holding this flame beside me. We were also collaborating with some really great artists. Joshua Goodridge, who's based in Brooklyn, and then this guy, James Patterson, who's just does amazing work, and he's kind of coming from an animation, hand-drawn background, but he got really into doing drawings and animations in VR. And so we realized that we could kind of use him to sort of generate visuals for the song. This is a very kind of cheesy picture of him. I think he probably doesn't like it, but and then we kind of found a pipeline for us to get the stuff into openFrameworks. And these are some very early experiments where we were experimenting with like animating his drawings or shapes based on the color, kind of tying colors to frequencies. We didn't end up using this. But then, things like this where we knew we wanted to have these crows flying, and so he would draw the crows by hand in VR, and we'd get these things from him that just kind of blew us away. And then, also kind of building set pieces for the different scenes. This was a sketch he sent us of a kind of street scene for a track that had a kind of more noir feel. And we got really excited when we saw this.
Turn out the lights, come over here. Don't you wanna see what it
So then Emily would kind of add in textures and sort of sequence everything. We had this very elaborate timeline where we could kind of bring stuff in and out and kind of animate things. So this was it, kind of the actual render that we would take from his drawings. And then for How Can I, which was sort of a Lennon-inspired track, it was very kind of minimal. We wanted to have like these shapes that would sort of come out of, kind of be tied to the music that would wrap around BT. And originally this is something that James sent us. But then we sort of steered him more towards this sort of abstract alphabet that could like represent different sounds in the music. Here you can see it's just, this is straight from the Quill app. And then here when we kind of actually pull it all into the song, there's a lot of kind of like over-under renders like this.
I'm afraid of myself.
And so when you're seeing it in VR, the words would be kind of floating right past your eyes. Sometimes it was a bit uncomfortable because they actually go through your head, and then we'd have to re-render the whole thing, which was really time-consuming.
When I am trembling.
Another big part of kind of building this album was trying to get BT into the world, into this sort of virtual world. And so we used James George's depth kit to shoot her playing her tracks. And then, you would get stuff kind of that would look like this coming out of it. But then we were able to sort of bring her back into the anechoic chamber.
Let me just give you some love.
And then we kind of had these other tools, like we made a kaleidoscope tool that you could like load and reflect and kind of animate. It's a lot to come up with like 38 minutes of visuals. Here's another one of kind of mixing PNG sequences and timeline stuff with particles and then the RGB captures. So a big aspect of this was that we were going to put this record player in the space, in the anechoic chamber, and it was going to stream for a week straight. And all the visuals would be running live, kind of in openFrameworks. So we actually had to figure out how do we like sync the record and the music with all the visual content. And someone on a mailing list suggested looking into linear timecode. And we actually ended up finding one guy who thought that he could etch 38 minutes of linear timecode onto a single side of an acetate. And so here you can kind of hear what it sounds like. It doesn't sound pretty, but we're actually driving back an audio file from our computer. So if I put this back at the beginning, the timecode's going out to the computer, and then we're playing back the audio file based on where the timecode on the record is. So you could like move the needle around and it would actually react the same. We actually had the audio on one channel, on the left channel, and the timecode on the right channel. So this was a huge relief once we realized that we could actually do this. And then here is just showing kind of the first time we connected it to the album render, where we could switch the track and suddenly the visuals would jump. It would reload all the assets and everything. So then, once we got that working, it was about kind of getting it working in the space and getting it working with this 360, stereo 360 camera, which is a total beast and kind of unwieldy. This is kind of us trying to get it working in the office, and this is what you need actually to run it. You need this like custom server just to connect to the camera. And this is what it sounds like. It's like really, really intense. So anyway, this is what the camera was sort of seeing in that space. And you know, we had to kind of line our understanding of the world up with what the camera was seeing, and see here you can see that our model of the record player and turntable are off. We start to sort of dial it in, and eventually once it's lined up, we're able to like occlude things in the space as if, you know, the record player is the 3D object. And we also had to build like a stereo 360 renderer, so we had like all this bounding box stuff to be able to know which camera view needed to render what. And so, you know, we basically render out like a cube map for each eye and then sort of stitch it all back together. It was just, all of that was sort of a nightmare. It was really, really stressful. But then eventually we got it working, and this was the sort of moment where we kind of kicked it off for a week, streaming for a week.
So long
and we're pretending to react to things we can't see. We're totally off. Like.
I'm holding this flame beside me.
But it was a really nice relief, and there was this sort of funny moment where suddenly like everybody was pulling out their phones, and because you could pan, if you didn't have a VR headset, you could sort of pan around the world, and you can kind of see on my phone, kind of looking down at the record player. And then if you had a VR headset, some of you might recognize these two. You would actually kind of have a much more immersive experience where you would be in this forest and you could be looking around, and hopefully a butterfly wasn't flying through your eyes, because that's really horrible. Nick had this bug where the origin point where the butterflies were spawning from were actually inside of your head. And that was really, really traumatic, because you would just get these like things going like this. To be fair, I also reversed the left and right eyes for a bit, and so he was testing it, and he was getting headaches, so you know, we kind of hurt each other equally, I think.
Hear my thank you. Heaven is blessed to have you.
And BT really enjoyed, because it was a live stream, going in and sort of photo bombing, or I guess like stream bombing or something, the stream. And so, you know, it's just an empty room with a record player, but you know, she could kind of remember what was actually being shown at what time. She had this strange guy following her around the room. And then the other aspect of this project was the live performance, where she was going to step into the anechoic chamber, and people in the room outside would essentially be looking through what would feel like a window via a projector into the space. And so we had a kind of a 4K camera that we would try and get the kind of right perspective to make it sort of feel like a kind of window. And then once we did that, we also needed to be able to track her and be able to sort of mask her out in depth, so we could have graphics moving around her. This was another thing that was really tough to figure out, where we had our kind of world and our kind of virtual camera, and we had to line our virtual camera up with the perspective that the video camera was getting, and then on top of that, actually get the Connect to then line up with that. So it was like getting three systems to sort of line up. But when it did, this is very crude and rough, we could like mask out foreground elements and have things that were in the scene be masked out by them. So here you can see like my shirt on the stool is sort of able to occlude what's behind it. So this was a really happy moment for us. And then once we did that, we got that figured out, we had to do that in the Bell Labs space. So this is sort of our debug view to make sure that we're lined up with the perspective of the camera. And then, Nick would often go in and we would try and get the Connect to line up with the 4K camera. And here it's a bit more lined up, I think. And then once it was lined up, we would sort of test, kind of put on debug mode and make sure that we were tracking where BT was, and we had like a location for the head and location for the guitar. So it was sort of almost like a stage, like it was very much like a theater stage in a way, where we had kind of relaying objects and scene elements out in the space. And then finally, we would do these kind of dress rehearsals with BT and make sure that we'd have to tell her not to walk through the people that she couldn't see, So that was kind of, took a bit of practice. And then finally, it was time for the performance, and BT would start off in the other room, kind of be introduced, and she would walk out to the door and then step into the anechoic chamber, kind of as if she'd sort of gone behind the curtain. And at that point, she would do her songs, and the audience would see, the graphics reacting around her. And one of the challenges was, how do we stay in sync, because it's a live performance. And so we had a kind of feed of BT and an audio feed which was sort of direct. And what we were essentially doing is almost like live DJing, where we were like slowing down the visuals and speeding them up, just based on, I think we had the original track in one ear and the live track in the other. And so we were trying to kind of line it up. It was easier to do that than to sort of find some algorithmic way to do it. So yeah, finally we had the performance, and I'll just show you a little clip of that.
What you felt, the red joy, the fine how you couldn't lie, you left it bare and tattooed your despair, and tattooed your despair.
See on her feet, if you kind of notice, you might see some of the things aren't getting occluded properly. Those little kind of, connect
waited
imperfections.
so long to put you in a box, but nothing can break your spirit. Try to change you.
So that's the kind of a very quick overview of the Raw Space project, and I think all the singles are online, and if you happen to have one of those VR like Daydream things or like Rift headsets, you can go on and actually check them out, and that's sort of the recommended way to experience it. So thank you very much. Really enjoyed sharing this with you.